Taking you back 2 weeks ago, roughly, we were told that opening instructions, like closing arguments, are not evidence. But what it is a roadmap of how their case is gonna go and how our case is gonna go. So you have an idea, as you're hearing all this evidence, how this case is gonna go from both sides. From the beginning, we told you that this case was about the homicides. I listened to Attorney Brown's opening again this morning as I was getting ready, and there were some things that he noted that I think are important. First off, towards the end of his opening, he apologized for some things. Essentially, he apologized for doing his job. He said it might be repetitive, it might be boring at times, but he needs to do it because he has a constitutional obligation to present their case and they only have one time. And that's fair. So now it's my turn to apologize. I am going to apologize for doing my job. First, let me talk about my job. A lot of people think my job is to, quote unquote, get the defendant off on their charges, to object to every single question that's asked, to ask any question I possibly can of witnesses, to be loud, obnoxious, and make a scene so that I can try to get this person off of their charges. It's not. My job is to make sure that they do their job. My job is to make sure that if they're bringing charges on someone, they're doing it because they can do it beyond a reasonable doubt. They can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And people don't like when I say those words, beyond a reasonable doubt, because it almost feels like a cop-out. And if you think that it's a cop-out, well, then your issue is not with me. Your issue is not with Chandler. Your issue is with the US Constitution that says that without them, you don't have me. And without me, you don't have them. My job is to make sure that the state, with all of its powers, look, they even have more tables than we do, that they do their job. And I'm going to do that job today. There's a couple things that I want to address before I go any further down the evidence. The first thing I want to address is sort of the obvious. Chandler lies. He told a lot of lies. Not only does he lie, but he goes to extreme lengths, if you will, to keep those lies going, or to perhaps cover up those lies. I guarantee you, every single person in this room has told a lie, has either covered up that lie, or has done something to keep that lie going. Maybe not now, maybe when you were a teenager. Go back to high school. I'm sure you lied at your parents all the time. You're not on trial, so your lies are not exaggerated and highlighted right now. But they are here. And the important part is that Chandler is not charged with lying to his girlfriend or to his parents. There's one charge that has to deal, one per parent, that has to deal with lying. Everything else is something that the state told you to try to feed you a theory, a motive, and to essentially taint your view on Chandler. So when we were going over jury selection, I asked you, how would you feel if he didn't testify? And a couple people said I would need to hear from him. A couple people said that they would treat him the same way they would do every witness. Bullshit. He lies, and they did a great job of making it known that he lies. If he testified, you were not going to believe anything he said. I also said that it was a game day decision, and most of the times it is a game day decision. This never was. If you heard from him, were you even going to believe him? You weren't, and that's fine, because it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, there's only one lie that really does matter, and that's the one that he said about his parents missing. I'm gonna make your life a little easier, and it's gonna be a little unconventional. There are certain charges that I believe the state has met their burden, and they have proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, from the beginning, first-degree intentional homicide is a serious charge. We've been here for the homicides. A piece of paper that is signed, a formal piece of paper that's signed by Chandler to the Dane County Sheriff's Office about a missing persons that clearly is not true, this is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I want you to think about that when it comes to talking about these homicides. I also want you to think about another thing. And I made a weird noise, I apologize. But I want you to think about another thing. When Attorney Raymond did her closing, two phrases, if you will, really caught on. Several times she said, "We know X, Y, and Z happened. We know that this happened." Pay attention to the times where she said, "We don't know." We don't know. I can't tell you how she was killed. We don't know. Whatever. And it was always in the parts that had to do with the homicides. When I was in law school, I was told that the words "I don't know" should never come from that table. Because you should know. If you're charging people with crimes, you should know. So now I'm going to walk you through the evidence that I think that they skipped over that matters for me in proving that first-degree intentional homicide was not something that they met their burden on. I first want to talk about the cabin. There is a cabin. There's no disputing that. Bart and Krista went to the cabin at least 2 or 3 times a year, I think is what someone testified to. It's possible that they could have gone to the cabin that weekend. In fact, you don't even know what their weekend plans were. Friends testified. None of them said, "Oh, they were going to come over to watch fireworks with us." So no one knew what their plans were that weekend. The reason they're making a big deal about it is because that is some kind of premeditation to them. That is some kind of intent. Ooh, he was going to do something that day. He knew he was going to do something that day, so he was going to say something about going to the cabin. He's talking to his girlfriend days before, on the 30th, so a day before. There's a text message exchange between Kat and Chandler where Kat asks, "We're not going to the cabin, right?" And he says no. You're allowed to use your common sense. When you have conversations with significant others and you're texting, you're not going to get the full story because sometimes you do it in person. What we know from him and his girlfriend is that they chatted on Snapchat. They chatted everywhere they could. So you're not going to get the full story from text messages. But what you do know is that at some point talks about going to this cabin as a family were happening. So this notion that the idea of going to the cabin was last minute because he needed to cover up these homicides that he was going to do is not true. Now, again with the lies. Certain lies mattered. Certain lies did not. What I want to clear up, and Attorney Raymond did a great job when she mentioned that we've seen this case multiple times. We've dealt with this case. We've talked to each other about this case. So sometimes we get things wrong. I'm going to clear up something that they got wrong. The evidence does not show that Bart and Krista knew about this SpaceX job. You heard from Kat's mother, Dulce, that she knew about it. You heard about Cress knew about it. Kat talked about it. Maybe another friend or roommate talked about it, but you never heard anyone testify that Bart and Krista knew about this SpaceX job. You heard from Bart's brother, Brett. I do not believe he mentioned it at all. So that's not a lie on this house of cards that was crashing down that Bart and Krista knew about. You also didn't hear that they knew about the scuba team, dive team, whatever you want to call it, lie with the City of Madison Police Department. You heard it from his girlfriends, ex's girlfriends and Kat. You heard it from his friends. But you didn't hear it from people that knew Bart and Krista and said that they mentioned it. And even then, all of these lies, what does it matter? So I want to talk about the two lies that the state really honed in on. And boy, did they do a great job talking about these lies and making it seem like it really was a big deal. Let's talk about MATC. First of all, yesterday, I think we heard from an official person from MATC that said, no record that he attended school during this time. Detective Shunk showed us transcripts. You saw all his grades. He did attend at some point. That was really all you needed. You did not need to have the email conversations. You did not need to have the text conversations. You didn't need any of that, but they provided it to you, even though it's not an element or a charge that they have to prove. During their opening and throughout the case, they made a big deal about this email. It was an email between Bart and Krista. First of all, the email happened October 10th, 2020. The jig was up a long time ago. It didn't all of a sudden crash and burn on the 1st of July, 2021. And Bart knew. He was onto it. He says he sounds just like Chaz on the phone. Use your common sense. These email exchanges are from people with a .gmail.com address. Official school people using a .gmail.com address. Both Bart and Krista are college educated. You want to tell me that they honestly thought that this was legit? Or maybe they knew that their child was lying and they were just going to carry on the lie. Same with AmFam. And I use AmFam colloquially, but American Family Insurance. Again, there was a person that testified yesterday that Chandler never worked there, but you still had emails, you still had text messages, you still had this and that confirming that he lied, even though one person could have done that. And again, it's not an element that they needed to prove, it's not a charge that they needed to prove, they just wanted you to know that he's a liar. And what does it matter? Here's what you need to ask yourself. What does it matter? Because according to them, that's motive. That's the reason why he did what he did. This house of cards built of lies was crashing down, and he had nothing. He couldn't do anything, but he had to murder these people. Why? Why? You don't know why. You were never told that they were going to kick him out of the house. You were never told that they were going to disown him. You were never told anything about why it matters. If this is going to be motive, if this is the reason you're intentionally killing someone, it better matter. There better be consequences. Kids lie to their parents all the time. And you just don't know how this was going to affect Chandler. He's complaining to his girlfriend the morning of about everything being fucked up and crashing down. You do that. That's what significant others are for. You honestly think that he's complaining about things crashing down And his mind is going straight to, well, now I'm just gonna murder them. There was another motive that was mentioned very briefly, but it was mentioned, so I'll talk about it. When Mitchell testified, the very last question was about a life insurance policy. And I believe he said that the payout may have been about $1 million. And he acted confused. He didn't really know about it. It could very well be that the only reason he knows that number, that value, is because of things that are happening now. I don't doubt that kids know about parents having life insurance policies. I don't doubt that. But ask yourself this, does everyone know how much the policy is worth? Probably not. Do you think you're gonna get $1 million from your parents? Probably not. And there was no evidence that was provided to show that Chandler knew that there was a policy in place and he knew the value, knew enough of that value to do something very drastic to get that money. There was no evidence that he needed money. Yes, he didn't have a job, but nothing came out that he needed money. And I'm spending time talking about a motive because, as the judge said, they don't need to prove a motive. Motive does not mean intent, and I need you to understand that. Motive does not mean intent. The other important part that I want to focus on is this timeline. If you go back to the opening, the state said that from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on the 1st, the killings occurred. Again, it's not evidence, but it is a roadmap, and it is important because that's how they're going to tailor their case throughout. Well, first of all, Krista didn't get home until after 5 o'clock, roughly around 5:12. They made a big deal about this MATC meeting. MATC with Chaz, MATC. You don't know if that was in person. You don't know what it's about other than MATC. You don't know if it was just a conversation that they were gonna have. You don't know if it's a follow-up. You don't know anything about it other than some kind of MATC chat was gonna happen between Bart and Chandler. And that was gonna happen at 3 o'clock. I don't know about you, but my meetings never run on time. The other important part with this timeline is what we heard yesterday from Bart's employer. We asked him about that spreadsheet that has these logins. And remember, the logins were in Eastern time. So what we said, what we were able to get out is that roughly from about 4:13, there was a login. What do we know about that login? We know that it's required, a password is required. We also know that, like a lot of dads, people keep their passwords in a place where they can remember them. We also know that the logins, that there was a certain amount of logins that you were able to do before you were booted out. We also know that that person tried these passwords, couldn't get in. So there's some leaps that you have to make in order for this theory or this timeline to make sense. The first leap you have to make is that Chandler knew that password. There's no evidence that he knew that. The second theory that you have to make is that while he's allegedly murdering his parents, he had the wherewithal to go to this computer and put on YouTube or something to keep it going, when there's no evidence that that even happened. There was a lot of evidence about cell phone data that were extracted, computer data, all of that, but nothing about Bart's laptop showing that there was YouTube or anything to keep that computer active, because it had to be active. It would shut down or it would log off after 20 minutes of inactivity. The other piece of evidence with this timeline is that you had that neighbor that during their closing The state said that the neighbor smelled something around 8 to 9 p.m. No, they testified that it was around 7 o'clock that they started smelling something. What we do know is that roughly around 8, around 8:30-ish, maybe a little earlier, look at your notes, Chandler went to Quick Trip to buy some ice. So again, another leap that you're supposed to make is that while he's allegedly murdering his parents, he decides, I'm gonna start this fire, I'm gonna put some things in that fire, but wait, I have to go to Quick Trip. Use your common sense. That makes sense to absolutely no one. They don't get the benefit of the doubt that I get. So they can't say, well, we might have been wrong about the timeline. They don't get that. What you have is a medical examiner, 2 medical examiners that could not say the time of death. So really, truly, do you know what time these alleged homicides happened? You don't. You know that they happened that day based on other circumstantial evidence that you can put together, but you don't know the exact time. Let's talk about what else you do not know. You do not know what gun was used. They want to make a big deal about this gun. Let's talk about it. You heard from a medical examiner that there was at least 2 to 3 shots of a gun, period. That medical examiner was not able to tell you what kind of gun, wasn't even able to tell you if it was a high-powered rifle, just a gun. She also wasn't able to tell you which wound occurred first. So this contact wound, that could have been the last one, that could have been the first one, you don't know. This gun was not even located until October. These homicides occurred in July. Chandler apparently hid everything. He hid it so well that they didn't find it until October when the owner of that farm was cleaning out. If anything, Dane County deputies did a thorough investigation. They spent at least 3 hours in that barn. You want to tell me they couldn't find a gun, but they were able to find a tarp? What you know from the gun is that there's a bullet casing and a bullet fragment in this basement that match to this gun. You do not know when that casing was there. You don't even know if that bullet fragment and that casing happened at the same time. You don't know that this is the gun that was used on Bart. You don't know that. So whenever you don't know about something, you have to ask yourself, have they met their burden? Is this proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Because you do have examples of what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. Those maps that we saw yesterday, tracking Chandler's every single move, matching up with where the bodies were found and at the time that they were found, that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A bloody tarp and some tools, that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But that doesn't mean that a homicide occurred. It means that something awful happened. And no one's disputing that. No one is saying that nothing happened to Bart and Krista. Something awful happened to these 2 people. And the very least you can say is that Chandler reacted. But you do not know what happened. And I know some of you have already made up your mind. I see it, and that's fine. Maybe you do think he murdered his parents. The question I have for you is, did the state meet their burden when it comes to first-degree intentional homicide? There are a lot of different homicides. First, second, reckless. They chose first-degree intentional homicide because they believed that they could prove that. And I'm asking you that question. What have you been given that proves intent? Some searches after the fact? During closing, they said that the last time that there was any kind of search happened on the 8th. And they believed that he was just deleting his searches every day, and he wasn't able to delete his searches on the 8th because he was arrested. There are searches on the 7th. And hey, guess what? There are times when I do not Google something. There are times when you all don't Google something. So he was smart enough to delete his Google history, but he's not smart enough to delete anything else. He's smart enough to do a very good job about cleaning and concealing these homicides, but man, was he just really bad when it came to everything else. You cannot have it both ways. You can't have someone that is so cold and calculated to clean everything up and then say to themselves, I'm going to leave one casing. You just can't have that with everything else that happened after these homicides. It's kind of laughable when you think about it. And you just don't have that with these homicides. Why? Why don't you have that? There was no evidence, there was no testimony at any point saying that Chandler had planned this out, and they would have brought it to you if they had it. There's no evidence at all that Chandler is a violent person. And I'm not saying that you need to be a violent person to commit homicides. You know that. But again, intent is something that means something. And there's just no evidence that's providing you with that level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you need for this first-degree intentional homicide. Do you know how Bart was killed? Exactly how he was killed. Do you know how Krista was killed? Do you know if it was an awful accident? Do you know if it was intentional? Do you know if there was someone else involved? You don't. And that's a problem. Now, for better or for worse, this case has gotten a lot of media attention, and unfortunately, I have to bring it up. You were asked every day whether or not you saw something on the news, whether you heard something on the news. And you were asked that for a reason. You guys have a really bad job coming up. It's difficult. I do not want your job. You have to go back and look at everything and make sure that everything that you're discussing in that room actually came from evidence that you heard from that stand and not from the Google searches that you may or may not have done. I'm hoping you didn't, but I'm going to be realistic. Or the comment section on YouTube. And you're going to have to hold that person accountable, and you're going to have to hold that person accountable because that's your duty. You have another very serious duty that's going to be hard for each and every one of you to do. You're going to have to take your emotions out of the equation. There was another promise that was said during the state's opening. They promised you that they were not going to try to tug at your heartstrings and show you pictures that they didn't need to show you. When Mitchell testified, do you think he needed a giant blow-up picture of his parents next to him to be reminded what his parents looked like? When Brett testified, Do you think it was important for their case to ask him the last conversation he had with his brother? Oh, and it happened to be on his birthday? The birthday being July 1st? No. They didn't do that because they needed it for the case. They did it because they want you to think of your emotions. They want you to feel things. Because when you feel things, it's going to be harder for you to separate feelings from facts. And you're going to have to do that. Because you may feel bad. No one here feels great about what happened. And after you make your decision, no one's going to walk out of this courtroom feeling at ease, at peace, happy. But you're going to have to do that. And people are not going to like it, regardless of what the decision is. And you're going to have to hold people accountable for it. Now, I don't get to come back up. When I'm done, the state's going to come up and they're going to do their rebuttal. And they're going to say everything that I said is flawed some way, somehow, or that you shouldn't pay attention to it. And that's fine. That's their job. They have the burden. They have the last say. But when they're talking during their rebuttal, I want you to think of this. What if I told you that at any minute, someone's going to walk into that door. Someone from the Dane County Deputy's Department is going to walk in and say, I found it. I found the video we were looking for. I know exactly what happened in that house on the 1st. It doesn't exist. But what if it did? Are you going to be paying attention to, I'm going to assume it's Mr. Brown, but are you going to be paying attention to what Mr. Brown has to say during his rebuttal? Or are you going to be looking at that door hoping that someone walks in? And if you're going to look at that door hoping that someone comes in, you have reasons to doubt. There are plenty of reasons to doubt that a first-degree intentional homicide occurred. There are plenty of reasons to doubt. You may not like that. It may feel like a cop-out. It may feel like I'm just doing something for the sake of coming up here and talking to you. I'm not. I'm doing my job. I'm making sure that they do their job. And I'm asking you to do your very difficult job of evaluating everything. And from day one, the issue has been the homicides. I want you to spend time on the homicides. Ask yourself the questions that you need to ask. I guarantee you that the 12 of you that are going to go back and deliberate are all going to have 12 different theories on what happened, and that's a problem. I'm asking you to find him not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Thank you.